Nummy, mother-in-law posted the photo at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. I know the exact time because I was sitting 3 feet away from her when she did it. I was at the kitchen table, finishing my second cup of coffee, reviewing a vendor contract on my laptop. She was on the couch. I could hear her typing. I didn't think anything of it because she was always typing something, forwarding chain emails, commenting on neighborhood Facebook groups, sending passive-aggressive texts to her sisters about Thanksgiving seating arrangements. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from my sister-in-law who had tagged me. Then another buzz. Then 5 more in a row. I looked at my screen. The photo was of my home office. My desk, my monitors, my filing cabinet, my shelves of industry binders. Except my mother-in-law had added text over it in big white letters. The freelancer's empire. 3 years of playing house in my son's business, and this is what she calls work. 47 people had already liked it. My husband's aunt had commented, "Didn't she get that big contract last year? What happened to that low bill?" My brother-in-law had commented, "More like a craft room tee-off." My mother-in-law had replied to him with 3 laughing emojis. I put my phone face down on the table. I picked up my coffee. I finished reading the vendor contract. I made one small note in the margin. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and I named it simply Archive. And I started saving everything. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 years old. I have a degree in operations management and 7 years of experience in supply chain coordination, which is a fancy way of saying I am the person who makes sure the right things are in the right place at the right time, and when they're not. I am the person who figures out why and fixes it before anyone important notices. I met my husband Daniel when I was 26. He was warm and funny and genuinely kind in ways that felt rare. His family owned a regional HVAC distribution company, not glamorous but solid, mid-size. About 18 employees, 3 warehouse locations, accounts spread across 4 states. His father had built it from nothing over 30 years. When his father retired due to health issues 2 years into our marriage, Daniel stepped up to run it. I stepped up with him, not because anyone asked me to, because it was falling apart and I could see exactly how to stop it. The company's vendor relationships were a disaster. Contracts were verbal handshakes or scanned PDFs no one had read in years. The inventory system was a spreadsheet someone had built in 2009 and patched with duct tape ever since. 3 of the major wholesale accounts had outstanding credit disputes that had been sitting unresolved for over a year, slowly curdling into quiet resentment. The largest single account, a commercial contractor group out of Tennessee that represented roughly 22% of annual revenue, had a relationship manager on their end who had been trying to reach someone at our company for 6 weeks about a contract renewal and kept getting bounced around. I called her back myself. Her name was Donna. She was relieved to talk to an actual human being. We spent 40 minutes on the phone. I took 11 pages of notes. That was the beginning. I was not an official employee. Daniel and I talked about it and we agreed it would be cleaner for tax purposes and for family dynamics if I remained a consultant rather than going on payroll. I had my own LLC. I invoiced the company monthly for a flat retainer that, if I'm being honest, was about 1/3 of what my work was actually worth. But Daniel was stressed and the company was struggling and I wanted to help. So I kept the number low and I told myself we'd revisit it later. We never revisited it. What I did over the following 3 years was this. I rebuilt the vendor contract system from scratch and organized it into a master file with renewal dates, terms, and escalation contacts. I resolved the 3 credit disputes. I repaired the Tennessee account. Donna and I developed what became a genuine professional relationship, and the account not only renewed but expanded. I created a new inventory tracking process that reduced shrinkage by about 30% in the first year. I set up automated reminders for insurance renewals, equipment certifications, and regulatory filings that the company had been missing chronically. I trained 2 of the warehouse supervisors on the new systems. I drafted the company's first actual employee handbook, which the company's insurance carrier had been asking for years. I did all of this from my home office, the one my mother-in-law called a craft room. I want to be precise about something, because it matters to the rest of this story. Almost none of this was visible to anyone in Daniel's family. Not because I was hiding it, I wasn't, but because the nature of operational work is that when it's done well, nothing dramatic happens. Contracts get renewed, accounts stay happy, equipment certifications don't lapse, invoices get paid, the machine runs. Nobody stands around applauding the machine for running. They only notice when it stops. Daniel's mother, my mother-in-law Margaret, had a particular story she told about me, and she told it often. In her version, I was a woman who had latched onto her son, moved into his life, inserted myself into the family business without being invited, and used the appearance of busyness to avoid getting a real job. She had a rotating cast of evidence for this story. I worked from home, suspicious. I didn't have a traditional 9 to 5, suspicious. I occasionally took calls outside on the patio, suspicious apparently, and I had not yet produced grandchildren, which in her accounting system was the only legitimate output a daughter-in-law could provide. She had shared versions of this theory with her sister, with her daughter, with her son's friends, with at least 2 neighbors, and apparently with a significant portion of her Facebook following. I knew about all of it. Daniel knew I knew. He would sometimes say she doesn't mean it, or that's just how she is, or she's under a lot of stress since Dad got sick. And I would nod and go back to my office and keep working, because the work actually needed doing and because I had made a choice to believe that this family was worth the friction. I want to be fair. I kept choosing that for a long time. The photo was not the first thing. It was the most public thing, but it was not the first. There had been the Christmas dinner 2 years earlier when Margaret had introduced me to her friend as Daniel's wife. She doesn't really work. There had been the phone call I had overheard where she told her sister that Daniel basically carries her. There had been the time she'd forwarded me a job listing for a receptionist position at a dental office with the message, "Thought this might be a good fit for you. Steady hours." There had been the quarterly family lunch, 3 months before the photo, where my brother-in-law Jordan had asked Daniel point-blank, in front of everyone, whether I was still doing the consulting thing with air quotes around consulting, and Daniel had laughed uncomfortably and said, "Yeah, she keeps us organized," and everyone had moved on to talking about Jordan's new truck. I had smiled through all of it. I had gone home and opened my laptop and kept working. But I had also started paying very close attention to what exactly I was doing. Not out of anger. Not yet. More out of a kind of quiet auditing instinct. The same instinct that had made me notice the Tennessee account sitting unresolved. The same instinct that looked at a broken system and automatically began cataloging its dependencies. I started keeping a simple document. I listed every recurring task I managed, every relationship I maintained, every system I had built or was actively running, not to show anyone, just for my own clarity. By the time the photo went up, that document was 4 pages long. The comments kept coming through the afternoon. By 3 o'clock, the post had 62 likes and 14 comments. Daniel's cousin had written, "Okay, but in her defense, that is a very nice desk, Joe." Which I think was intended as a defense of me but didn't quite land that way. Someone from Margaret's neighborhood group had commented, "Your son is so patient, Kriya." Daniel saw it that evening. He asked Margaret to take it down. She said she was just joking. He said it wasn't funny. She said he was being too sensitive. He said he was being too sensitive. He said he'd ask her again tomorrow. She said fine and went to watch television. The post stayed up. I watched Daniel absorb this, the way he always absorbed things from his family, with a kind of exhausted resignation, like a man standing in light rain, who has decided the best strategy is to simply wait for it to stop. I understood it. His mother was difficult in ways that were old and deep and tangled up with his love for her and his grief about his father's health and 100 other things that had nothing to do with me. I didn't blame him for struggling with it. But I had also been standing in the rain for 3 years, and I was starting to think about umbrellas. I screenshot the post. I screenshot the comments. I added them to my archive folder, which now had 17 items in it. Then I opened my 4-page document and I read it again, very slowly, from the beginning. I want to tell you what I decided and what I did not decide, because I think people sometimes hear stories like this and assume the person at the center of it woke up one morning full of cold calculation and revenge. That's not what happened to me. What happened was simpler and sadder than that. I sat with my document and my archive and my 4-page list of everything I quietly kept running, and I felt something I had been not feeling for a long time finally surface. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you have been telling yourself a story about a situation for years and you finally allow yourself to read the actual data. The data said, these people did not value what I did. They did not believe what I did was real, and they were comfortable saying so publicly to 62 people who pressed a like button because they had calculated correctly, based on all available evidence, that I would absorb it and keep going. The question the data raised was simply, what happens if I stop? Not out of spite, not to hurt anyone. Just, what happens if I stop doing the things that only I know how to do, and I redirect that energy toward my own life? I sat with that question for about 4 days. Then I started making calls. The first call was to Donna in Tennessee. We had a good relationship by then. Genuinely good, the kind you build when you've solved real problems together over a few years. I told her I was transitioning out of my consulting arrangement with the company and that I wanted to make sure her account had a proper handoff so nothing fell through the cracks. She was surprised. She asked who would be taking over. I told her honestly that I wasn't sure yet, that I wanted to flag it to her directly so she wasn't caught off guard. She said she appreciated that. She also said very carefully that she hoped whoever took over would be as easy to work with as I had been. I told her I'd stay available to her personally for 60 days in a transition capacity through my LLC at my standard consulting rate. She said that was reasonable. I sent her a separate agreement that afternoon. That was important. I wasn't burning the relationship. I was just detaching it from the company and attaching it to me instead. The second call was to my own attorney, a practical woman named Susan who I had used for my LLC setup years earlier. I explained the situation. She asked a few questions. We talked through some specifics. She said what I was planning was straightforward and legal and she'd have a letter ready within 48 hours. The third call was to a recruiter I had met at a conference 2 years ago who had reached out twice since then about operations director positions, and both times I had said I wasn't available. I told her I was now available. She said she had something I should look at. Over the following 2 weeks, I did not change anything visibly. I showed up to the family Sunday dinner. I smiled at Margaret. I responded to emails and texts normally. At the company level, I kept all active tasks running. I didn't drop anything, didn't miss anything, didn't let anything lapse. I was not interested in causing a crisis. I was interested in building a clean exit. But I did stop building new things. I stopped the project I had been halfway through to renegotiate the freight terms with our 2 largest carriers, a project that, when completed, would have saved the company roughly $14,000 annually. I stopped the work I'd been doing on a proposal for a new regional account in Kentucky that I had identified and cultivated for 4 months. I documented both projects in a handoff folder, noted where they stood, and filed them neatly away. I also began, quietly and methodically, migrating things to neutral or transferable status. My personal email, which I had used as a point of contact for several vendor relationships, was replaced with a company email address that I set up and then handed admin access to Daniel. Donna's account files, which I had maintained on my personal system, were transferred to a shared drive with clean documentation. Every password for every account I managed was recorded in a company-owned password vault I created specifically for this transition. I left nothing booby-trapped. I left nothing deliberately broken. I left everything documented. I just left. On a Wednesday morning, I sent a formal email from my LLC to the company, addressed to Daniel and CC'd to the company accountant, providing 30 days notice of termination of my consulting retainer, effective at the end of the current billing cycle. I cited standard contract terms. I kept it entirely professional, Then I drove to a coffee shop and signed an offer letter for an operations director position at a logistics firm in the city, full-time, salary plus benefits, reporting to someone who had spent 20 minutes in my interview telling me specifically why my background was valuable and exactly what they were hoping I would build for them. I ordered a large coffee and sat by the window for a while. It was a nice morning, sunny. The kind of morning where the light comes in at a low angle and makes ordinary things look better than they are. I thought about the first time I had called Donna, 6 weeks into this job that wasn't really a job, 11 pages of notes spread across my kitchen table, feeling the particular satisfaction of a problem beginning to come into focus. I had liked that feeling. I was glad I was going to get to feel it again somewhere it was actually wanted. I should tell you what I came home to. Daniel had seen the termination email. He called me while I was still at the coffee shop. He wasn't angry. He was confused, in the way of someone who has just picked up a glass expecting water and gotten something else entirely. He said he thought we had talked about this. I said we had talked about revisiting my retainer arrangement many times and had never actually revisited it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he needed to loop in his mother because she handled some of the administrative side. I said okay. That seemed fine to me. I found out later, from Daniel to his credit, that when Margaret was looped in, her first response was not concern about the vendor relationships or the operational systems. Her first response was, good, maybe now she'll get a real job. She said this at 11 in the morning on a Thursday. By Thursday afternoon, she had figured out that the Tennessee account renewal, which was due in 6 weeks, had a key contact named Donna who did not have any current company contact information for anyone other than me. She had also discovered that 3 vendor contracts were up for renewal in the next 45 days, and the renewal process documentation lived in a system she didn't have access to and didn't know how to navigate. By Friday morning, Jordan had called Daniel to ask why the freight invoices looked different, which was because the automated reconciliation process I had set up was flagging discrepancies that had previously been going unnoticed, and now, without me there to resolve them, were sitting in an inbox generating error notifications. By the following Tuesday, Donna had sent a politely professional email to the general company address asking for an update on her account relationship and noting that her team's timeline for the contract renewal was beginning to move. Margaret called me on Tuesday afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was warm in the way that people are warm when they need something, quick to laugh, generous with my name, careful to mention how much the family valued me. She said she hoped I hadn't made any permanent decisions and maybe we could all sit down together. I didn't call back that day. I was in my second onboarding meeting at my new job, learning the names of the people I would be working with, and the light in the conference room was good, and the problems in front of me were interesting. And I felt, for the first time in a while, like someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be. By the end of week 3, the calls were coming in the way that water comes in through a cracked hull, not all at once but steadily, finding every gap. Margaret called 4 times. Jordan called twice. Daniel's aunt, who had commented what happened to that low owl on the original Facebook post, called once and left a voicemail explaining that she'd always respected what I did for the business and had never understood why some people had been dismissive about it, which was an interesting position to arrive at 3 weeks after pressing the like button. Daniel and I had several long conversations during this period that I won't fully detail here, because some of it was between us in ways that feel private. What I will say is that Daniel is not a villain in this story. He was a man who had spent his adult life managing an impossible dynamic between a demanding mother and the people he loved, and he had handled it, as many people do, by hoping very hard that everyone would eventually decide to get along. He hadn't defended me the way I had needed him to. He knew that. In our conversations during those 3 weeks, he said so, more than once, in the direct and undefended way he had when he was being genuinely honest rather than managing a situation. That mattered to me. I want to say that it mattered, but it didn't change what I had built, which was a life that no longer depended on permission from people who didn't believe it was real. The recruiter who had placed me at the new job called 3 weeks after I started to check in, the way good recruiters do. I told her it was going well, She said she was glad and mentioned that she had gotten a call through the professional network from a company that sounded like it might be Daniel's family business, asking if she knew anyone who could step in on a short-term basis for operational support. She said the rate they were offering was, in her words, frankly not competitive. I told her I was sorry to hear that. I meant it. I genuinely hoped they found someone good. The Facebook post came down on a Saturday, 4 weeks after it had gone up. No announcement, no apology. It just disappeared. I noticed because I had kept a screenshot of it in my archive folder, which by then had 23 items in it, carefully organized by date. I moved the archive folder to an external drive and labeled it clearly, not because I expected to need it, just because careful documentation is a habit that has never once failed me. I think about that post sometimes. The way it had felt to see it, sitting 3 feet away from the person who made it with my coffee and my vendor contract, knowing that she had absolutely no idea what she had just photographed. She looked at that office and she saw an expensive hobby. She saw a woman playing at work. She saw exactly what she had decided to see, and she shared it with 62 people, and for a moment it had probably felt satisfying. The pleasure of saying something you've believed privately for a long time out loud, where everyone can see. I wonder what it felt like. 3 weeks later, when she picked up the phone to call me, I wonder if she understood, in that moment, the difference between what she had photographed and what the photograph had actually contained. Not a hobby. Not a craft room. Not a woman playing house in someone else's business. A load-bearing wall. You can decide to kick a load-bearing wall for a long time. You can take photos of it and write jokes about it and get 62 people to press a button that says they agree with you. But the wall doesn't care about your likes. The wall is just standing there, holding things up, waiting for you to realize what walls are for. I stopped waiting for them to realize it. And I found a building that was glad to have me. I've been in the new role for about 4 months now. Donna's team signed their contract renewal last week, not with Daniel's company. With a new vendor I identified for them as part of my current job, which operates in an adjacent space. She sent me a personal note afterward. She said it felt good to finally be working somewhere I was, and I'm quoting her here. Treated like the asset you actually are. I'm not going to tell you the family dynamics resolved neatly. They didn't. Margaret has not apologized, not directly, not in the genuine way that means something. She has been warmer to me in certain surface ways that I recognize as the warmth of accommodation rather than understanding. She needs Daniel. Daniel loves me. The math is not complicated. Jordan asked me at a recent family event if I thought the business could recover the Tennessee account. I said I thought it was possible with the right person in place and the right approach. He nodded like he was storing that away. He did not ask me what the right approach was. I did not offer it. I have noticed at these family events that Margaret does not mention my work anymore. Not to dismiss it, not to joke about it. She just doesn't mention it. There is a shape in her conversation where it used to sit, and now there's just a careful nothing. I find that more honest than the jokes were. Daniel, to his credit, told her recently, I heard this secondhand from his aunt who has apparently recalibrated significantly, that if she ever posted anything like that again, he would not be attending family dinners for a while. I don't know exactly what he said or how he said it, but I know it was said. That mattered too. I'm not telling this story because I want you to think I won something. I don't think of it as winning. I think of it as stopping. Stopping the thing where I kept subsidizing a version of my own invisibility. Stopping the quiet daily transaction where I traded my actual capabilities for the approval of people who had already decided, before I walked into any room, what category I belonged in. Stopping the waiting. I was very good at waiting. Patient, organized, thorough. I documented everything. I followed up. I made sure nothing fell through the cracks. These are not bad qualities, but I had been applying all of them toward the wrong goal. The goal should never have been, make yourself indispensable to people who think you're dispensable. The goal should have been what it is now. Find the rooms where the work you do is seen clearly, valued honestly, and paid accordingly. It turns out those rooms exist. You just have to be willing to stop holding up the ceiling of the room you're in long enough to find them. My office at the new company is on the 4th floor. There are large windows. In the afternoon, the light comes in from the west and sits on my desk in a way I like. I have a plant on the windowsill that I have not yet managed to kill. Nobody has photographed it, but if they did, they would be photographing exactly what it is, a place where real work gets done, by someone who knows precisely what that work is worth. I know that now. I won't be negotiating against myself again. If you've ever been the person in the room who keeps things running while everyone else debates whether what you do is real, I want you to know that the moment you stop, they will find out very quickly. And more importantly, so will you. The calls will come. Let them ring. Build something better with the quiet. There is a kind of cruelty that doesn't know it's cruel. That's the part that took me the longest to name. Margaret didn't post that photo because she wanted to destroy something. She posted it because she genuinely didn't believe there was anything there to destroy. That's almost worse. Deliberate malice you can argue with. Comfortable blindness just sits there, certain of itself, pressing the like button. What I've come to understand is that the way people treat your work is usually just the way they see you, and the way they see you is almost never really about you. Margaret looked at my office and saw what she'd already decided I was, a woman borrowing significance from her son's life. No amount of vendor contracts or system documentation was going to change that picture, because the picture existed before I ever walked into that house. I could have rebuilt that company from the ground up, and she would have found a way to explain it that kept her original story intact. That's what we do when we're invested in a version of someone. We edit the evidence to fit the frame. The mistake I made, and I want to be honest about this because I think it's the part that actually matters, was believing that if I kept doing good work quietly enough, long enough, the frame would eventually change on its own. That patience and competence would eventually become undeniable. That one day she would see the spreadsheets and the renewed contracts and the operational systems and simply revise her opinion. I gave that possibility 3 years of my best effort. It was a generous gift to give to someone who never asked for it. What I learned is that you cannot work your way into being valued by someone who has decided not to value you. You can only work your way into exhaustion. The intelligence isn't in doing the work harder. The intelligence is in recognizing, clearly and without self-pity, when the work you're doing is disappearing into a room that will never acknowledge it, and then finding a different room. Rachel didn't blow anything up. She didn't send an angry email or make a dramatic announcement or wait for someone to finally notice and apologize. She just stopped. She stopped subsidizing a version of herself that only existed to make other people's lives easier while they publicly questioned whether she was real. She stopped negotiating her own value with people who had already submitted their final offer years ago. And the moment she stopped, the actual shape of what she had been doing became visible to everyone. Not because she revealed it, but because its absence made itself known. That's the part that people miss when they call this a revenge story. It wasn't revenge. Revenge requires you to stay focused on the people who hurt you. What Rachel did was the opposite. She stopped focusing on them entirely. She focused on herself, on what she was actually capable of, on where that capability was genuinely wanted. The calls that came after were not the point. They were just the natural consequence of a system losing the component it had been pretending didn't matter. There is nothing complicated about cause and effect. What you refuse to see will still exist. What you mock will still function. What you dismiss will still hold things up until the day it decides it has somewhere better to be. The people in Rachel's life learned this the hard way, through missed calls and panicked emails and a Tennessee contract that walked out the door attached to the woman they had laughed at. I hope they learned something real from it, but whether they did or not was never Rachel's responsibility to manage. Her responsibility was to herself, to her own intelligence, her own integrity, her own willingness to keep showing up fully in rooms that actually deserved her. That willingness, turned in the right direction, is the only foundation worth building on. The rest has a way of working itself out.